Welcome to chapter 13 of Pride and Prejudice. At the end of the last chapter, Jane and Lizzie had returned home from spending some time at Netherfield, and this chapter opens with a line that is in every adaptation. It is Mr. Bennet saying to his wife, "I hope, my dear, that you have ordered a good dinner today, because I have reason to expect an addition to our family party." And what Mr. and Mrs. Bennet say next actually gives us a lot about them, and just like their relationship, and there's a lot to unpack here. So Mrs. Bennet responds with, "Who do you mean, my dear? I know of nobody that is coming, I am sure, unless Charlotte Lucas should happen to call in, and I hope my dinners are good enough for her. I do not believe she often sees such at home." What she is saying here is pretty much like, I'm the mistress of this house. I should know who's coming. Like, this is my job. Like, my job is to know who's coming in and out of this house for dinners and have good dinners ready. And plus, she's a busybody. Like, she would know. So she then surmises that it has to be someone that would regularly come, and assumes it would be Charlotte Lucas, who we can then surmise comes often, which then makes her jump to, why is he telling me this? And my dinners are fine enough. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Like, she should be fine with whatever I got, because my dinners are better than what she is at home, which gives us a glimpse at her competitiveness. And the brilliance of Mrs. Bennet is how human and relatable, like, you're going to come across her in real life, even if the details of it is not the same today. But also just like the hypocrisy, like, I love it, because we do know that her father was, I believe, a lawyer, like her brother is now. She married someone that is landed gentry, and he may not be high on the social ladder like, say, Mr. Darcy, but he's still landed gentry. That's still a little bit of something for her to hang her cap on. Whereas the Lucases, and you see this like competition between the two mothers, they, in Mrs. Bennet's eyes, are like an upstart. Like, they just kind of got the title, kind of got recognition and stuff like that, a little bit of importance. And it's so funny because she technically is an upstart, but she is lumping herself in like, no, we've been here forever. Like, we are important, more important than these upstarts. So like, it's so silly, and I love that Jane Austen is kind of reflecting that without, making it too obvious. And it's just a thing that would have been so common at that time, because, like I've said previously, there's not much for a lot of these women to focus on. And that leaves a little bit too much room for people such as Mrs. Bennet to put much more importance on the tiny details, like the state of their dinner and their ranking in society and things like that, to give themselves a little bit of importance. However, even with our current society, with both men and women having luxury to indulge in more and engage and have more careers and things like that, we still find the little nitty gritty kind of nitpicky details to make ourselves feel like we're better than someone else, sometimes unintentionally. And so I love that Jane Austen is kind of reflecting that. But to continue then with Mr. Bennet's comment, which is that he speaks in riddles, with him saying that, like, "I hope, my dear, that you have ordered a good dinner today, because I have a reason to expect an addition to our family party," and then saying, "The person of whom I speak is a gentleman and a stranger." And he's setting her up. And I love that she says a gentleman and a stranger. It must be Mr. Bingley. And it's like, it's showcasing that she's not as smart, and he's setting her up to showcase that she's not as smart. And someone like Jane and Lizzie are going to be like, oh my god, like, he's not a stranger. That's not the answer, obviously. But it's a little mean that he's setting her up like this. But it's also showing that he thinks himself clever, but like, his way of entertaining himself is to set his wife up like this. And what Lizzie has a conversation about later is the dynamics between her parents, how it's a little cruel of her father to set them up against their mother in a certain way and dislike her for being silly. And it's very easy to dislike her for being silly and not as intelligent as him, but she has some good qualities. It's a little harder to find sometimes, but she does. She has good intentions too, but maybe she could have been different if he engaged with her differently earlier on. Maybe she wouldn't have focus so much on their legacy and their position in society more than he does, things like that. But just like Mr. Bennet, definitely most of the time when you see him with Mrs. Bennet, he is using her for his own entertainment. And again, very similar to Mrs. Bennet, using his intelligence to lord himself over her as she uses her position to lord herself over others, things like that. So there's a lot of foiling and mirroring and hypocrisy and things like that going on throughout this book. And that's what I love most about, close reading it. I think Mrs. Bennet's reaction also gives us another glimpse into her personality and an aspect of her, which is that she kind of jumps to conclusion and runs with things. And we see it, for example, here when, Mr. Bennet says, we're expecting someone as a gentleman and a stranger, and she guesses wrongly because it's not Mr. Bingley, he's not a stranger, but she says, it is Mr. Bingley, I am sure. Well, I am sure I should be extremely glad to see Mr. Bingley, but good Lord, how unlucky, there is not a bit of fish to be got today. Lydia, my love, ring the bell, I must speak to Hill this moment. She jumps to a conclusion, this is the answer because this is the answer she wants, and runs with it. She's already gone practically, and Mr. Bennet has to rein her back in. And it's showing that, this is, you could say it's foreshadowing, this is something that she's going to do in the future. She has this idea in her head and jumps to conclusions and ignores evidence before her. We're going to see it with, I think, Jane and Mr. Bingley's relationship, and I think that's what puts her foot in her own mouth without realizing, and it's the cause of, I think, their separation briefly. We see it with how she talks about Mr. Darcy, things like that. She takes one detail, then makes it everything and just runs with it. Or it's something that she thinks should happen and runs with it. And this is something I think Lizzie has too, where she has this opinion in her mind and allows it to influence her stronger than the evidence before her sometimes, as we see with Mr. Darcy currently. The other thing about Mr. Bennet saying is a gentleman and a stranger is setting up Mrs. Bennet not only to lord his intelligence over her, which I don't think is his first intention of phrasing it like this. His first intention is actually to set her up in a very similar way that he does in chapter 1 with Netherfield. He is setting her up to run around like a chicken with her head cut off, knowing how fixated she is on her daughters marrying well, which is something that he should treat with reason, because she's not wrong with the fact that his home is going to, when he dies, is going to be inherited by Mr. Collins and leave the rest of them with nothing unless her daughters marry well, and then the others can depend on it, she can depend on it. It's just how the world works, sadly. We see it in Jane Austen's very life. When their father dies, the mother and two sisters are left with very little, depend on their brothers to add to their yearly allowance, and even then help them to find homes and such. And their lives aren't easy after the fact. That is what Mrs. Bennet is afraid of, and it's something she should rightfully be afraid of. That is a good trait in her. And he's setting her up knowing that she's going to go into a tizzy, that there's going to be a potential young gentleman to marry his daughters off of, and it thinks it's going to be entertaining. And while I like Mr. Bennet, I simultaneously don't. And it's the same with Mrs. Bennet. There are traits about both of them where you're like, I do like this trait, but they overall can be annoying. And in him, he's not taking things as seriously as he should, and he is treating his wife ill, and it's just a different perspective of treating one's wife ill, an ill match. And I think that's what Jane Austen's trying to have a conversation of, that an ill match may not be say a violent one. It can be just one where they dislike and look down upon one another and kind of use one another's weaker traits for their entertainment. It can look in many ways that it should respect each other. That should be a good marriage, and that's what Jane Austen is trying to say in this story. Mr. Bennet finally tells his family who is coming, and he says, about a month ago I received this letter, and about a fortnight ago I answered it. For a case of some delicacy and required early attention. It is from my cousin Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases. And I have mixed feelings about his comment here. On one hand, the latter part of it is almost strangely humorous, but I think out of shock value, the way he just bluntly states this horrible detail. And simultaneously, though, it's giving us the stakes that this is a story. This is going to be, their experience is going to be a little bit different than the average person, even though it's mirroring average life of the time, that they have something at stake, that if they don't marry, they are going to suffer a much harder life, and it's going to be a much harder starting place to get married if that was the case. Plus, they wouldn't have a home and things like that, so that would make it harder for them to, be pursued by worthy partners, I guess you could say. Like right now, they have a lot working for them despite having small dowries. But at the same time, like, I don't like how he did this, because it's telling us that Mr. Bennet sat on this information for at least a month, and at least for 14 days knew Mr. Collins was coming and did not tell Mrs. Bennet, who would need to prepare. And it's kind of cruel of him to spring this on to her on the day of. However, I kind of know why he probably didn't do it, and one of the reasons probably is that he would realize that he would hear no end of it, that he would be harassed by his wife, that she would also, as we see with her reaction, jump to a negative. She would push him to not accept this invitation or accept him inquiring to come visit because of her wounded pride and all this nonsense and kind of things like that. I could see that being the case, and him kind of delicately seeing the line that his letters might be silly, but maybe there's a chance that he's reasonable enough that he might marry one of the girls and their situation be sorted. Like maybe he is thinking like that in the back of his head. We just don't know, not as outwardly as we know what's going through Mrs. Bennet's head, who is very opaque with her scheming. And a part of me wonders, would it have been a little bit more subtle if she had more time to scheme, but the other part of me knows that that would not have been the case, so it still would have been very opaque. But there's nuance going on here. So, like I said, it's setting the stakes, but also it's giving us more of Mr. Bennet in this slight cruelty to him. But at the same time, he's not hiding behind what is facts. He's kind of like, we just gotta acknowledge the elephant in the room kind of thing. So there's a like give and take. Like I don't know, it's great. I don't know how else to describe it. Mrs. Bennet's reaction confirms what I just said, with her going, "Oh my dear, I cannot bear to hear that mentioned. Pray do not talk of that odious man." It's confirming that probably why Mr. Bennet did not approach Mrs. Bennet about this prior to the day of, that she is so kind of blinded by her emotions surrounding this. Again, she is embodying sensibility of that time, which is a heighten of emotions. But she continues to say that, "I do think it is the hardest thing in the world that your estate should be entailed away from your own children. I am sure that if I had been you, I should have tried long ago to do something or other about it." Her saying, "I do think it is the hardest thing in the world," is not wrong. It's just, it seems grandiose and silly, and they're probably rolling their eyes a little bit, but it's true, because what can they do? A bunch of women, if say Mr. Bennet was to die tomorrow, they would be left with nothing to support them, to be able to then procure good marriages. They're in a decent position right now. That position would not look like that tomorrow if he were to die. And it is the hardest thing, because she can't do anything really besides beg for help from family members and friends and depend upon them. Something that Jane Austen has firsthand experience with her mother and sister after their father died. That they were dependent on their brothers to help add to their income, yearly income, and even then they were living harder lives after the father's death. So she's not wrong. It's just that she says it in a manner that makes you want to go, all right, And Jane and Lizzie had previously tried to explain the nature of the entail, and they had often attempted to do it before, but it was a subject on which Mrs. Bennet was beyond the reach of reason, and she continued to rail bitterly against the cruelty of setting an estate away from a family of 5 daughters in the favor of a man whom nobody cared anything about. Again, showing that the way that she goes about it makes it harder for some of the daughters to be sympathetic, but it's also showing what Lizzie is going to acknowledge later, that their father's relationship with the mother and the way that he views and treats her has trickled down and affected Jane and Lizzie, that they feel like they have to kind of be a stand-in of the father and explain, and are frustrated by her reactions and emotions of the moment and stuff like that, that this is just how it is, which is exactly how the father kind of just states it. It's just how it is. But it's not new, the entail. And the funny thing is that, like, I like to think that if Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet had been, say, Mr. Collins, like, had a situation like that, she would have peacocked that like crazy. She would have lorded it. She would have loved it if she was the winner of it, not the loser of the situation. But this is a common situation. And it's Jane Austen having a conversation of how with this patriarchal idea of continuing a bloodline, even if it means leaving daughters out in the cold, is not a good thing in the long run either. But like, it's setting certain groups of people up for hardships that they had no, like, control over, that they can't control, that there was no boy born in the family, and it's unfair that the females are left to suffer, especially in a family like this where there is no brothers to give money to them. Not like Jane Austen at least had a couple brothers that could kind of help. It would mean that Mrs. Bennet would have to depend on her one brother to help support her and her 5 daughters unless they marry prior. And that this is explaining why Mrs. Bennet is in such a tizzy and intense about them marrying. Even though it explains it, doesn't mean I agree with her and the opaqueness that she's going about, but she feels like any moment her life could end, and she needs to help her daughter set them up in a better situation, which would also help her too. I talk a lot about mirroring and foiling and all these kind of things going on within Jane Austen's books, especially like Pride and Prejudice. I'm talking a lot about just characters and situations being similar yet slightly different. Take, for instance, Caroline Bingley and Mrs. Bennet. There's a lot of similarities between the two of them, yet slight differences, but it's their similarities that make a more interesting conversation. But what I want to get at here is that it's the same thing amongst her books. Take, for instance, in Pride and Prejudice, and what we're getting in this chapter, which is the introduction of Mr. Collins and how he is set to inherit Longbourn because it's an all-girl family, is very similar to the circumstances in Persuasion, where it's an all-girl family and the cousin is set to inherit their estate and kind of title, I guess you can say, and money and all that. But yet the family's reaction and relationship to this interloper is very different. They hate Mr. Collins. They see him as an encroacher and rude and cruel, and he lives up a little bit to this perception. But it's not his fault, as Mr. Bennet is saying. It certainly is a most inquisitive affair, and nothing can clear Mr. Collins from the guilt of inheriting Longbourn. Nothing can clear Mr. Collins of the guilt because it's out of his hands. It's done by the law, done by the land, ignoring the fact that the law was created by man to benefit men. And that's what, like, the tongue-in-cheek kind of aspect of this comment is being done by Jane Austen. But it's then interesting to then compare it to how some of the girls are fawning over the cousin in Persuasion and the father, how much they want to bring him into the fold, into the family. And the only reason why they get mad at him is because he doesn't marry Anne, and it's not because they want to keep her within the family, but it's because they're so vain, the father and the eldest daughter, and so proud that they think that out of reason to deny her or not marry her. So, like, it's not out of security. It's out of vanity, out of pride that is being rooted in that case. But the situation is very similar, but yet the reactions are very different. And there's a conversation being had, but at its core, it's still the injustice kind of being done to these women because of the men around them and the system in place. These women in persuasion are in the situation that they're in because of their father's spending habits. In Pride and Prejudice, they're in the situation that they're in because of the law of the land done by men, but also the father did not set aside enough money to combat the situation, which he could have done theoretically, but I do not know enough about those spending habits and the money and the income and all this, but he could have maybe done a little bit more to help. Who knows? This is an area where not a lot of people, but a couple of people like to pick at, even though we don't have a lot of information for. Once again, I think the theme of this book is hypocrisy. Like I said, there's a lot of mirroring and similarities, and you're seeing how hypocritical characters can be. But at its very core, like you see just so bluntly kind of put out to us from Mrs. Bennet saying, "No, I'm sure I shall not, and I think it is very impertinent of him to write to you at all, and very hypocritical. I hate such false friends." And it's funny, that line, hypocritical, I hate such false friends, because we see Mrs. Bennet is kind of a false friend. She is a false friend to Charlotte Lucas's family. She's a false friend to some of the other mothers while pushing her own daughters and hoping for the downfall of others. False friend in many sense, and just having the word hypocrite preluding that, it's funny to me. Moving on to Mr. Collins's letter, it is very easy to just pull out the important details within the letter that is relevant to the moment. For example, him coming and hoping to make amends and possibly to find a wife. However, it's actually telling us a lot about him as a person, and him as a person is just a interesting character study on humanity and humans and a certain type of person. Because take, for example, if you isolate the opening where he opens with the disagreement between Mr. Bennet and his late father and says, "Since I have had the misfortune to lose him, I have frequently wished to heal the breach, but for some time I was kept back by my own doubts, fearing lest it might seem disrespectful to his memory for me to be on good terms with anyone with whom it had always pleased him to be at variance." This captures wonderfully him as a person, though it's not as apparent as, say, like a little bit later when you have this humorous interaction between him and Mr. Bennet, where they have a conversation about complimenting young ladies and whether it is rehearsed or practiced, or he has a little surplus in his back pocket ready to use whenever. It's showing that he is consciously aware of what society expects and what he should be doing, but he does it in such an awkward, manufactured way. Almost giving a slight autistic coded, but I don't want to say that because I can't diagnose him and I don't know, and that's not always the case with everyone with autistic, but he's trying to match what society expects. He's trying to mirror what is happening around him, but he just is, there's a part of his brain that just isn't quite getting it, and he does it so mechanically, like it's so awkward, robotically, and because of that, he fumbles, and it reveals a little something else, and reveals a falsehood to it. Going back to the lines I just read, it's strange that he's bringing up the disagreement, but it could be viewed as a good thing that he's just airing out, like, I'm not gonna avoid the elephant in the room. But then you have him thinking that he's talking about familiar love and respect and loyalty by saying that he, even though wanting to heal the breach between the families, he didn't want to do it in disrespect to his father, even after his father had passed, because of family loyalty. However, he is actually still doing it, so then he's not being loyal to his family. However, you could also view it of like moving past a silly disagreement, but then is he doing it for his own benefit? It's not done out of the goodness of his heart. He's doing it because he's wants to go a step farther than his father and actually see the home that he's intended to inherit and almost lord over it. a little bit, like to lay eyes on the thing that will be his, to be able to hold himself higher in society, just as he is waving his position with Catherine de Bourgh as this great honor and privilege. And look at me, I'm better than you. And you're seeing then another aspect of a different character that is similar to Mrs. Bennet. It's funny that Mrs. Bennet hates him so much because she does something similar. She lords her position over, say, Charlotte Lucas's mother. So this, like, just opening sentence is already showing us this insight to him as a person, which makes him, one, interesting to Mr. Bennet, and hence why he's invited him, because he's like, oh, this is going to be entertaining. I want to watch this type of person. I haven't witnessed this type of person. This could be entertaining. But it's setting others, such as the young ladies, up into an awkward position because he's so wrapped up in his head and is missing the, like, he's not perceptive enough to pick up on the detail that while what Lizzie and Jane are saying to him is polite, technically you might hear in the tone of their voice that they want him to leave them alone. He's missing that. So there's a lot to unpack with Mr. Collins, and I'm just getting started with his letter. Continuing on with the letter, we're seeing again a similar sentence kind of structure, and it's just similar to the opening where, like, he's going on about being honored by Catherine de Bourgh, the patronage, and how is a valuable rectory of this parish, where it shall be my earnest endeavour to demean myself with grateful respect towards your ladyship, and be ever ready to perform those rites and ceremonies which are instituted by the Church of England. And he even says demean himself, and he does it in, he's saying it in this kind of like tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, look at me, I'm a martyr kind of like way. It's that kind of like, oh, you're seeking, like, oh no, you're such a good person, look at you, your thinking is you're using it in a way that's a praising kind of way, but in actuality he's perfectly capturing what he's doing. That on another hand, you're seeing that you're kissing her ass, like you're so willing to bend and contort your own life for this one person because you aspire to be like that, in a sense that you want a little bit more power, a little bit more prestige, and so you're willing to kiss someone's ass to rise above others. And there he is, similar to Caroline Bingley. And but it's funny that there's so many similarities with other characters like Mrs. Bennet and Caroline Bingley, but yet we all view him in such a more negative light, and it's because there's no nuance to it. It's very opaque, but done almost like he's smarter than the rest of us. It's just like done in a way that you're like, oh good God, this is the type of guy that you want to keep clear of. That he thinks that he's knows all, it is always right, and you're not going to get your way. So Charlotte figures it out, of leading into his inflated ego, and yes, but I just like it's showing in the sentence that he thinks that he's revealing something good about himself, a good trait about himself, that he is willing to do whatever for his betters. And look at me, I'm upholding a certain societal ideal, I'm like loyal, all these things, but what it's really showing is that you have no backbone, kind of thing. Like it's a double-edged sword, his sentences, that he's not even aware of. Once again, it is his exact wording of things that makes Mr. Collins so like skin crawling and also annoying. And it's because he thinks that he's being clever and he thinks that he's being good and kind, but he's just like full of himself. And you see it here with him saying in the letter, being next to the entail of Longbourn estate will be kindly overlooked on your side and not lead you to reject the offered olive branch. The way he worded it, I would want to punch him in the face. There's no reason to say the entail of Longbourn. He could have just said being next to the Longbourn estate. But no, he put the entail, emphasizing this will be my house, his ownership of it in this situation. He didn't have to do it if he was truly trying to butter up Mr. Bennet, and not even butter up, but like truly try to make amends. But he's not. He's scheming for his own self interest, which I is interesting because I keep seeing clips of the other Bennett sister, which is not available yet in America, but I keep seeing clips on TikTok. And when Mr. Bennet dies, it looks like there's a scene where Mr. Collins comes back and there's this awkward interaction where Charlotte's trying to soften the harshness of his words. He is right, but he's saying it in a very uncivilized, unpolite way, but he thinks he's doing it politely. That captures exactly what he's doing here, too, with like him saying, not lead you to reject the offered olive branch. Like, look at me, I am being so kind, offering an olive branch, which you never offered. Look at, I'm a better person than you, and it would be frowned upon if you reject this offered olive branch. And it's that kind of thing is like, you're not really a good person, or not that. It's like doing a good thing is not truly a good thing if you need praise for it, if that makes sense. Like doing a charitable thing kind of then becomes canceled out if then you turn around and need to have recognition and praise for what you had just done. And that is what he's doing here. Continuing Mr. Collins' letter, it really does show, like I just said, a lot about him as a person, but you kind of have to sit and really think about what he's saying and what's being unsaid or what's being hidden behind his words. Because he then says, like, I cannot be otherwise than concerned at being the means of injuring your amiable daughters, and beg leave to apologize for it, as well as to assure you of my readiness to make them every possible amends. On the surface, it sounds good. That is his intention. And most people would just see it as that. And he's the type of guy that thinks he's smarter than he is. But Mr. Bennet is, I think, smart enough to see what is being unsaid or what's hidden behind those words. What he doesn't say is, he doesn't ask how his family is doing. He doesn't say anything about his wife or making amends for his wife, just his amiable daughters, and hopes to make amends in like assuring the future. And it's not, he's clever enough to realize this is a man looking for a wife. This is a man who now has a job and thinks very highly of himself and is probably thinking, all right, got the job, time for a wife. And is prowling around my daughters for this. And this could be entertaining because he thinks he's smarter than he actually is. So he's thinking, at the very least, I'm going to get some entertainment out of this. But also, maybe I'm wrong and maybe this could be good. Maybe this could work out and he might marry one of my daughters. And things could be fine. However, he would probably not be happy about this because you're seeing that he's presenting himself like so graciously, like, look at me, I'm helping you out, I'm offering this olive branch, I am a better person. And to quote Brennan Lee Mulligan, something that he said in the D&D campaign that I think about all the time, I saw a TikTok video of it, and it's, to reach a hand down to someone, they have to be beneath you. And Mr. Collins thinks that this family is beneath him. And I think of like anyone else, like Mr. Darcy would have worded this a little differently and would have actually genuinely made plans to help the family and presented it in that way. But no, Mr. Collins is thinking about himself, and his words are like empty, if that makes sense. They're so hollow, and he's scheming in his own ways, and he thinks he's so clever, like I said. So like there's more to Mr. Collins, and I could be wrong. I could be analyzing this in a very particular way, but to me and everything else we see about Mr. Collins, I think that he thinks himself smarter than he actually is, and thinks that he is such a good, kind person. Look at me, I am a man of God, I am a good person, I am helping out, but everything is done for his own self-interest. And also, is it really charitable if you need praise for it? And he is constantly bragging and all these things. And it continues with the presumptiveness of him then saying, I propose myself the satisfaction of waiting on you and your family Monday, November 8th by 4 o'clock, and shall probably trespass on your hospitality till Saturday se'nnight following, which I can do without any inconvenience, as Lady Catherine is far from objecting. So he is thrusting his, how do I put this? he sees himself as the one kind of running the show and dictating, and he is assuming that there would be no problem with him coming to this house. And he's lucky that Mr. Bennet is allowing him to come to this house and not disavowing him of or removing the film from his eyes and realizing the reality of the situation, that this is still Mr. Bennet's house at this moment, even if you're projected to have it in the future, but he's already seen it as his own house, that he should be just allowed to. And the only person that he needs to get approval from is Catherine de Bourgh. And he already has it. So he assumes it would be fine. He doesn't know, what if the family was out in London? They're doing better than he thinks. He doesn't know, but he's making assumptions because he thinks selfishly, and also that he is of a better. And there's a lot here, but I just wanted to pick at him putting a date and a time and saying how long he would stay and assuming it would be fine. The only person he needed to check with was with Catherine de Bourgh. And we're also seeing that his elitism, which is very similar to, again, we're seeing another mirroring with Mrs. Bennet and also with Caroline, that they think highly of positions and stuff and who they align themselves with, and then hold heirs because of who they align themselves with. So quickly, just to sidetrack. So this copy of Pride and Prejudice is an edition I bought from an artist that I was going to say illustrator, but an artist that I have bought some things. You can see a couple of them behind me. And I worked with her in the past on a book binding project. And so I was really excited she was doing this Pride and Prejudice edition where she illustrated and did the whole book herself. And throughout some of the pages, we have lovely artwork like this. And that's why I love this edition. It's so pretty and well done. And I'm very excited about seeing more artwork as I continue. And I will show more of the art as they go on, but here we have the Bennet sisters enjoying their time in the parlor as the letters being read to them. We then get everyone's reaction. Mrs. Bennet suddenly is changing her tune, being like, well, if he's planning to make amends, then I have no problems, pretty much. And Jane saying, well, it's difficult to know exactly what kind of amends he means to make, but the wish is certainly to his credit. Seeing him in a more positive, hopeful kind of light, like hoping, like she doesn't know what he could intend, but hopefully being good, adding to her character and personality. I like every time we see her, you're seeing more like succinctly, because we don't see Jane too often, but every time we do is very succinctly who she is as a person, which is that she sees everyone in a very good light. She's a kind person that could easily be taken advantage of, as Elizabeth points out later. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is thinking herself, she is chiefly struck by his extraordinary deference for Lady Catherine and his kind intention of christening, marrying, and burying his parishioners whenever it was required. And this thought is not telling the readers exactly what she's thinking, but pointing out the details of the letters that actually should be inferring more about him as this person and what Elizabeth is picking up on, which is the only woman in his life that he is holding deference to is going to be Lady Catherine de Bourgh, not his wife. She is first in his life. He is a kiss-ass. He will be focusing his entire life around this random woman because of her title, but also willing to kind of put everything aside to christen, marry, and bury parishioners. Saying, again, his job comes first, the wife comes second, but also those specific roles of his job, not preaching sermons, but those roles, the birth, the marrying, the death of a life cycle. Those are the only parts that he cares about for person's lives and his parishioners' lives. He doesn't care about the middle grounds of it, but also it's inferring that he's realizing that he just needs to check off the next stage of his life, that he needs to have a wife and have a baby. That's what his intentions are. There's no romance. There's no getting to know the individual. He is very surface level. He would not be a good husband, at least to her, and that is what she's picking up on. And Elizabeth makes it even more clearer when she then says, he must be an oddity, I think. I cannot make him out. There is something very pompous in his style. And what can he mean by apologizing for being next in the entail? We cannot suppose he would help it if he could. Could he be a sensible man, sir? Looking to her, she's picking up exactly on what I was saying, and I think what her father has picked up on too, that there's something odd with him, that his words may be hollow, that he's very pompous, and there's a self-importance to him. And so she looks to her father to confirm, because I think it's a little different when you're hearing it than seeing the words too, or like being able to do both. And she's not looking at the words, and also she's trusting in her father's judgment of other people, because she's commented about how her father likes to be entertained and like study other people. She's picked that up herself. That is a one trait from her father that she's kind of personally taken on, as we saw in a previous chapter when she made a note of it during a visit at Netherfield, when she says that she likes to have a study of people and judge. And she looks to her father, who is the person that she kind of idolizes slightly, because again, we see later that he has diminished his mother, so she wants to be more like her father. But he says, "No, my dear, I think not. I have great hopes of finding him quite the reverse. There is a mixture of civility and self-importance in his letter, which promises well. I am impatient to see him." And that is just telling us that he is very hoping to be entertained. I have a slight Janeism, I guess you could say, where I'm hoping that Mr. Bennet's hoping that he could be wrong and that this would prove fruitful for his daughters, or at the very least, even if he is not sensible, that he would be kind enough to be marry, or like good enough for one daughter and kind enough to take care of the rest of the family. I think he has slight hopes for that, but at the very least, he's going to be entertained by this man who is proving to be interesting as a character study. And that's what he is hoping for out of this. There's someone new come in to be entertaining in a character study kind of way, which is very callous of him too, to then thrust this person onto them, and they're gonna suffer in his company, but he doesn't know this at the time. At the same time, like I don't know. I'm just hoping out that maybe he doesn't want to admit that he's hoping that this would be for good, because he doesn't want to seem like he's on the same side as his wife, because he at this point doesn't care for his wife and would rather not have anything to do with marriages. And if he even hints at wanting anything to do with marriages, then she would talk endlessly to him about it. Like, there's something here that is left open for us to theorize. But this is Mr. Bennett is one of those characters that we don't get a whole lot about. So there's a whole variety of opinions on him from other readers, and if you look at all the adaptations, we're seeing slight differences in how he's portrayed, because there is this vagueness and nuance that is left for the readers to fill in, and it's fun for the readers. And once again, I'm going to say, like, this is what we're lacking in books, is not only, like, for instance, what I just said with Lizzie, pointing out the important details of the letter, but not handing to us what she's thinking quite, but wording it slightly, but also, like, leaving enough vagueness for the readers to then have a field day to play in the sandbox and think about and infer, and really then analyze humanity on a deeper level. Wow. So as I mentioned, I think Elizabeth is trying to embody and impress her father a little bit by analyzing other people, as he likes to do. It's a little game that they like to do, as pointed out in other chapters and stuff like that. But then Mary, I think, wants to be like that too, but is a little bit of a try hard, but then trying to be a little bit more moralistic, like trying to embody both Jane and Elizabeth at the same time, and it's not working well. At least, again, that's my interpretation of Mary in this text. Again, we don't get much about Mary, so it's left up to interpretations. And as you see, like, you get plenty of stories, like the other Bennett sisters just came out, and there's a version that I read that I really liked, and I'm blanking on the title of the book, but I'll put it down below, that I really enjoyed this spin-off of, like, Mary and Kitty in their lives, and it was really well done. But getting to the point, Mary says in the point of composition, the letter does not seem defective. So she's looking at it in a very surface level, being like, well, he wrote a good enough letter, it's not defective, he did everything right, technically. And she says the idea of an olive branch perhaps is not wholly new, yet I think it is well expressed. And so she's trying to be literary. She's looking like the olive branch isn't wholly new, but well expressed and well done. She's very surface level on this. She is not quite found the nuance and the subtext of his letter that Lizzie has picked up on, that Mr. Bennet has picked up on. So I feel bad for Mary because she's trying, but she's not quite there. And also trying to find some moral in this. Meanwhile, Kitty and Lydia couldn't care less because, like, it says here that unless their cousin came in some scarlet coat, and obviously it's proven that he will not be because he is in the church. They say it's now some weeks since they've received pleasure from the Society of Men in any other color. Like, they're obsessed with soldiers. There's no way that they're going to be any interest, and their interest is out the window anyway. Don't care. Don't give two shits. Mrs. Bennet, however, is very excited because she at least picked up on the potential of him wanting to find a wife. Like, she found that subtext in his letter, but she also has a bias because she's looking for that everywhere. And at the very least, she's trying to find some good in the situation, and like she has the burden of, and I say burden nicely as I can, of making sure her daughters are settled, and she has potentially a home and an income too, because once Mr. Bennet dies, they're all left out with nothing, very little. So she's trying to make sure they all have a safe future, and even if it means biting her tongue around Mr. Collins, maybe this could work out for the best. If he is hoping to find a wife maybe with her daughters, then it could be fine. Everything could be fine. She is not looking at people's characters too deeply, unless, like, you know, kind of what she can get from it. I don't know how to describe it. I'll try to describe it better later, but that's their reactions. I've mentioned this many times before, and I will continue to mention this and point this out. The thing that I love most about Jane Austen's writing that stands out to what we're seeing in a lot of books today is that she's not holding our hands. There are many instances where she gives us just enough clues, just enough breadcrumbs to then form our own opinion. She gives us the space to form our own opinions. And case in point, with this chapter, when we first meet Mr. Collins, we're given very distinct descriptions of him, but also very mundane, if that makes sense. And I can name a couple books that do a very similar thing where, like, the description of the characters is distinct without being, like, too unusual. Like, The Cruel Prince is one of the ones that come off the top of my head, but I'm always thinking about that book. But, like, the First series also is like that. Like, it's almost mundane, but there's a distinctness in their descriptions that tells us a lot about the person if you take a moment to process it, because you can read this chapter quickly and surmise just enough off a first impression of Mr. Collins. You're going to surmise that he's probably going to be a little bit different. There's high hopes walking into it, but the longer you interact with him, your hopes are going to start to fade. But let's dig into this a little bit more, because that's what I'm trying to do. And I will admit that probably those of the time will pick up on this faster than we do. However, there's a lot of conversations being had that is still relevant to today. Like, our first introduction to him is Mr. Collins was punctual to his time and was received with great politeness by the whole family. The very first thing we learn about Mr. Collins in person is that he's punctual. And there's a host of things that you could surmise from this, which mirrors conversations being had then and mirrors conversations we're having today. Being punctual, what does that mean? On one hand, it could show that you're being respectful of the other person, that you respect their time that you're taking in it, and also that you're kind of adhering to a promise. You promise to be here at said time, and you're here, that you can be trustworthy in that sense. However, are you lame? Like, according to social standards of the time, social fad, the etiquette, like, is it fashionable to be on time or not to be on time? And, like, who's deciding what is fashionable? And this is still something, like, even like today, culturally, like, it's a very different thing for certain cultures. It's almost more respectful if you show up late, whereas there are other cultures where, like, if you show up late, don't even show up at all. Like, it's very rude. And, like, I lived in Sweden for a period of time and studied abroad for a period of time, and was with Erasmus, and I got to see the whole range of, like, people that would be later in the day and exist later in the day and eat later and do things later and a little bit more flexible, I guess you can say, through time, whereas others were a little less flexible, and I kind of, like, fall in the middle. But it also comes down to the individual person. But with this case, what is this telling us about Mr. Collins? Well, he's going to be the polar opposite of probably Darcy and Bingley, who are coming from a fashionable, that's what I'm trying to say, fashionable circle. So like, look at the first time we meet that gang, the Bingleys and the Darcys. They were late to the dance and made like a whole spectacle kind of out of it. And I don't think Darcy intended it. It's just how the timetable went, and they even commented on it at that time. But moving on, we see that Mr. Collins seems neither in need of encouragement nor inclined to be silent himself. Like, the ladies were ready to talk, he was too, which is good and bad. Again, it's like the punctuality, there's not one answer. Like, him being ready to talk is good. It's not like you're pulling teeth, which you could have surmised from a preacher. They could have been silent type, it could have been hard, it could have been awkward, especially among strangers where you're trying to figure out what to talk about. But even though he's easy to talk with, he also simultaneously doesn't shut up. And as we get to know him better, he more so talks at you instead of with you. And that gets annoying. So what this whole thing with Mr. Collins is, he is showing how he kind of embodies certain points that you have a wide range of, like, you could fall into, and then the balance that is kind of needed, because the whole book is kind of about balance. Like, Pride and Prejudice isn't inherently good or bad, but it's about balance. Everything about them, like, being deferent to maybe someone older or higher in standing than you, can be good in balance. So his whole character is to represent the need of balance, and it's done comedically, so it doesn't feel like we're being lectured to, which, again, all the books at this time would have needed to be moralistic in a sense, but Jane understood it needed to be entertaining to you. Like, there are certain books that came out at that time that just felt like a sermon, and that's not gonna continue on or actually stick in the reader's minds. Maybe Mary's, because that's what Mary is kind of a little bit about, but still, if you want your society to kind of learn from something, you gotta put it in a way that is entertaining and digestible. And by putting these conversations about morality and just like little details about society and etiquette and all these kind of, mannerisms, put it in a way that is digestible. Don't just tell them one thing, show it to them. And it's very similar to like what Suzanne Collins does in her books. Like, she's having these big lofty conversations, but she's putting it in a manner that is digestible for a wide range of readers, that also then allows us to kind of internalize it a lot more than we would have if you just told us the straight facts. I also like how Jane Austen makes Mr. Collins the complete opposite of Mr. Darcy, but simultaneously very similar. And it adds to this conversation to be had, and the hypocrisy, which is another focal of this book, in my opinion. Like, it's not only about balance, but it's a lot about like hypocrisy, and I've talked about a lot of hypocrisy in this book. But the description of Mr. Collins is that he was he was tall. Yes, he was tall, heavy-looking young man of 5 and 20. His air was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. He was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. Very much like Mr. Darcy. He's grave, stately, manners very formal. But Mr. Darcy, I believe, is described as being tall, or at least we've all in our heads pictured him being tall and very elegant looking, whereas Mr. Collins is outright told to us is not. He is a heavy-looking young man, and that works against him. And Jane Austen is using these features too, that in society we already surmise that someone that looks like that, we can discard, we can ignore, despite maybe their mannerisms being the same, or maybe he can get away with it as much as Mr. Darcy can get away with it sometimes. And we're having a conversation about then the hypocrisy of two people acting the same way, but based off how they look, or even gender, can be interpreted or reacted to differently by society. And I really like that I almost forget because I imagine him very differently because he does talk a lot more than Mr. Darcy. So, like, again, there's a lot of similarities, but then differences between him and Mr. Darcy, and they're supposed to play off each other just as Caroline Bingley and Mrs. Bennet play off each other. The other thing about Jane Austen is that you should really pay attention to the conversations she is giving us. She often kind of steps back, kind of goes very broad as she's describing that they're having easy conversations, these kind of things, but then she zeroes in. She zooms the camera in. Why? And for instance, in this case, the conversation that is being zeroed in is the one between Mr. Collins and Mrs. Bennet, of him describing the fame of her daughter's beauties, and that fame had fallen short from truth, that they're so beautiful, and he hopes that they would be able to marry soon. And she jumps right in, going, "That is very kind. I wish with all my heart it may prove so, for else I would be destitute enough. Things are settled so oddly." And the thing that I love most is that the two of them think that they're smarter than they are, but they're very, like, blunt. But they think that they're not being blunt. They get straight to the point. But because they're not being blunt to be blunt, which can be a useful tool, they're blunt by accident, thinking that they're being clever. It's so cringeworthy. And also, I like that it's showing that the two of them kind of talk very similarly, which then you're seeing a lot more similarities where the two of them kind of think highly of social class and these things. So you're again being set up now with him and Mrs. Bennet, and it's funny that they butt heads, like her and Caroline Bingley butt heads. So, like, we're seeing a lot of similarities, and then how it manifests and how it reacts based off situations and different contexts. And I like Jane Austen is creating these mirrors and foils. The other thing we should glean from Mr. Collins is that he's self-centered. He's selfish. He's thinking about himself and his advancements and his needs and desires outside of Catherine de Bourgh. He will listen to Catherine de Bourgh and what her needs are. But still, even when he's trying to do things for Catherine de Bourgh, is in hopes of bettering and furthering himself and rising himself. So very self-centered. And I'm saying that because, like, when he talks about his cousins and saying that he's very sensible of the hardship of my fair cousins and can say much on the subject, but that I am cautious of appearing forward and precipitate. Him saying being cautious of being forward is inferring that how do I put this? My purpose of being here is in hopes of looking for a wife. That is my intention. But he didn't have to do that. He doesn't have to marry. He could have offered help in other ways. There are numerous ways, but no, it's how can I do something for you that better helps me? Everything comes back to me. He is not doing a good Christian duty of helping his cousins who are in a tough situation. He could have done that without anything involving himself, focused solely on them, but he doesn't. And his whole purpose of being here isn't to make amends in the family or, anything lofty as he tried to proclaim. It's to find a wife, because Catherine de Bourgh told him that he should find a wife. That is what you should do at this point in your life. And it makes, like, it's frustrating, but at the same time, like, these are the kind of people you're going to meet in life. He is not an uncommon person, not only of that time, but today. You're going to come across people who think that they're doing good, to the world, good charity, but really it all comes back to them. And the actions even sometimes is not charitable, because there are certain decisions you can make that really is. And in this case, he could have helped them in other ways that didn't involve marrying them, who also, many of them don't have much say. And we see it with Lizzie when she rejects his proposal. She's lucky that her father sided with her, because she could have very easily been forced into this marriage, as her mother was trying to do. She got lucky, but that wouldn't have been the case for everyone. And there's an awkward power balance then that you could have a conversation about here. Finally, the scene ends with this very awkward interaction, which is a fan favorite and one of my favorites, which is him talking about the dinner in the 2005 movie, The Very Good Boiled Potatoes, and compliments to the daughters. But here he's complimenting the daughters, and Mrs. Bennet gets very offended and says, "We can afford a cook," which, the thing that's interesting about this interaction to me is that Mrs. Bennet is trying to present herself like, oh, we're so close to destitute, and so he assumes that the daughters have to cook, look, they have to work harder. And she's like, no, because she also wants to give herself airs that they're higher in standing than they really are. So trying to hit that balance is very hard. To be respected of being of a standing and not being looked down upon, which he already was walking in planning on doing, looking down upon them, and that he's their savior, but simultaneously wanting him to help. So like Mrs. Bennet is not as brilliant as she would think and like to be, because I think it takes a very, very specific person that probably does not really truly exist or very rarely exists that can walk that line of earning respect while simultaneously garnering aid, charitable aid. And I think the problem is, in this case, the reason why it's not working is that she's not gaining respect in a certain manner. Like, say, I think it's Fairfax? No, yes, Miss Fairfax and Emma. She is destitute, but yet everyone respects her and gives her the respect despite her aunts having fallen into destitute, living in destitute, needing help because of how she interacts and presents herself and does not give herself airs. That is someone that makes this work. And it's, the other reason why it works is because she's not trying, I think, in most cases, though it's up to her interpretation if she is maneuvering and working with what she kind of got. That could be the case. The other interpretation could be she's just a good person and just like people that want to do good for, help her because she is a good, kind person. But in this case, Mrs. Bennet thinks very highly of herself, gives herself more airs, thinks very highly of social standing, but that works against her then needing to have charitable help. But then like also being very offended of getting charitable help and outright talking about being near destitute. So like we're seeing this awkwardness of wanting to be in both worlds with Mrs. Bennet, but also with then Mr. Collins, we're seeing him apologizing for way too long. And it's like it's showing that he does not have quite the wherewithal, social etiquette wherewithal, or social interactions to realize, like, apologize. And if you kind of don't keep bringing it up, we would move past it, but you keep bringing it up. So either he doesn't have the wherewithal to move on, or he's intentionally doing this to poke at them, to belittle them. Though I think it's the formal. Again, Mr. Collins is also up to interpretation. This is the brilliance, again, of Jane Austen. She leaves enough space for us to have a lot of interpretations of Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Collins. Like, you can interpret and imagine them in many different ways, and we see it with the adaptations. Mr. Collins can be interpreted as someone being slightly autistic coded and not quite picking up on social cues and things like that, and that's why he fumbles. However, you can also pick him up as someone that is has a wherewithal and knows what he's doing. He just isn't as smart as he thinks he is and is kind of mean. Very similar to the clergy and Emma. Why am I blanking on names today? But his is like he also is a social climbing essence. So a lot that you can discuss with this chapter. This was not a very long chapter, but very fun. And it allowed me to dig into what Jane Austen's doing, which is focusing kind of like on hypocrisy and balance. She uses her characters to do this. And like I said, she's presenting this moral kind of conversation and character study, but in an entertaining way. And the best way to do it is also creating characters that mirror and foil one another. And it's showing hypocrisy, it's showing the need of balance, and simultaneously doesn't go too far, just far enough to be funny or annoying, but simultaneously not too far because they feel human. Every single one of these characters have traits to them that I'm like, oh, I definitely have interacted with someone like that in real life, even 200 years later, or 100 so years later. But yeah, this was the end of chapter 13. Hopefully we will move on to chapter 14 next. It is also a very short chapter, so I might do that next before getting back into Wuthering Heights, or I might get back into Wuthering Heights. Let's see my mood. It is spring, so I kind of want to now get into into Pride and Prejudice more than like Wuthering Heights felt more fall and winter, but I'm still working through that book too, so check back in. I will continue posting videos talking and dissecting both these classics. And the fun thing is, while they are very different, they are very similar, and they're having similar conversations too, while also different and taking different avenues. It's fun talking about these books. And it's fun, like, for instance, this one, it's very easy to read it on just kind of surface level and get a lot of enjoyment and still gain a lesson from it, but digging into it, taking a moment to then stop and look at what is actually being said tells you a lot more. And it's also showing us that Jane Austen she put a lot of thought into what she was saying and purpose. And I'm going to keep harking on this. This is something I think is lacking in books today. It was lacking in books then, but this is just, I want to hold up someone that is exceptional like Jane Austen and encourage other people to, hopefully push themselves to write or emulate that style instead of quickly trying to put books out for money or prestige, Mrs. Bennet-esque. But really think about what you're trying to say and do, and when you put thought into it, it will come back and with praise and gratitude instead of trying to check certain boxes and just do things quickly, hit certain tropes. Like, it's not going to do as well as, I don't know, for me, I think my favorite books are always ones that really are having a conversation and really digging into characters and humans and not just trying to, make money and hit tropes and things like that. I'm rambling, but please check back in because I do love talking about these books and I love to hear what you guys think about what I've been saying or what you picked up or your interpretations. Please leave a comment down below.